Hello and welcome to another episode of But Have You Heard About Conspiracy Theory Edition? Dun, 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 dun. As always, I'm your host, Courtney, and I am joined by Matt.
Hello.
So, today we have kind of a long one, I'm thinking. Mostly because it's one subject with quite a few different conspiracy theory takes.
Okay.
Are you ready for this? We're going to be talking about the Titanic today.
Okay.
Did you know that there were conspiracy theories about the Titanic? We're gonna...
Like, how crazy are we talking? Like, it didn't sink, the glacier's not real, you know.
We're gonna go into the fact that, like, there's a theory about how the Titanic ship itself was switched for insurance purposes, that it was knowingly sank, that, different ways in which it actually submerged under the water or broke, or, like, what actually caused the sinking. Whatever it may be, there's a whole bunch of different things. I remember at one point where people thought that the Titanic was just a movie and didn't know it was real.
Right.
And I remember being like, what? I feel like those are people that I don't know.
You don't pay attention
in history.
Fifth grade.
Yeah.
Fifth grade history. Yeah.
I was talking to my little sister, and we actually went to go to Margaret Brown, aka the unsinkable Molly Brown's house in Denver. Which was the place that was her house. We did a tour. We did a Titanic tour. Strongly suggest if you're ever in Denver that you go do this. And we talked about how we both had like a weird Titanic phase. Like everybody did. Like you got obsessed with Titanic and possibly a little like obsessed with like dead people. I was like, I think everybody went through that at some point, like late elementary school, middle school era.
Well, when did Titanic the movie come out?
1999. I was in 5th grade.
Yeah, so
I believe.
I'm willing to bet the movie helped a lot of people with this obsession as well, and possibly the incorporation of these crazy people. When did these conspiracies become prominent?
I don't actually know. I think that some of them actually probably were prominent before the movie came out. Let's dive in a little bit to this. Dive in, get it? Let's sink into it. Sink our teeth into it.
Too soon.
It's been 111 years, okay? Mm-hmm. The 84 years phrase is from the movie, but, it's been 84 years, homie. It's been 100-something years now. So, when the RMS Titanic sank on April 15th, 1912, the world was in disbelief and shock. How could a ship heralded as the unsinkable ship sink? Hubris is the probable answer there. However, just as when things don't make sense, many have come up with the theories ranging from the ship not actually sinking to it being a planned catastrophe and mechanical issues that have led to theories over how it sank. So let's establish the facts of what we know before we go into these different theories. And I'll let you guys, as well as Matt, decide which ones make sense or are just complete fabrications.
That shit crazy. Yeah.
So, facts. The RMS Titanic sank in the early morning hours of the 15th of April, 1912 in the North Atlantic Ocean, 4 days into her maiden voyage from Southampton, which is over in England, to New York City. She collided with an iceberg, damaging the hull's plates below the waterline on the starboard side. When the ship collided with the iceberg, it caused the front compartments to flood. The ship was the largest ocean liner in service at the time and had an estimated 2,224 people on board when she struck an iceberg at around 11:40 at night on Sunday the 14th. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes for the Titanic to finally sink at about 2:20 in the morning on Monday, the 15th of April. This resulted in the deaths of more than 1,500 people, more than 50% of the people on the ship, making it one of the deadliest peacetime maritime disasters in history. Fun facts, because of the Titanic, we actually got like an overhaul system of maritime law and what is, deemed appropriate to happen in sinking ship situations, in response times and responding, and the mandated need for life jackets for everyone, as well as enough boats and everybody knowing where and actually having like evacuation test runs for people.
Right.
So they actually know where to go if an accident happens. So silver lining about the Titanic.
Yeah. The only time we ever do anything for human safety is when tons of people
have died. Like, look at 9/11. We had the whole overhaul of the TSA system.
Yeah. Was that overkill? Maybe. But all these safety features and functions are second thought, which is crazy. It's like, you know what would happen if, I don't know, we hit something and the ship sank? Well, it can't sink because it's unsinkable. Just because you say it's unsinkable.
Well, and that's why, I mean, I think it's hubris.
Yeah.
Is why the ship, ultimately sank.
Yeah. No boats, no life-saving equipment.
They didn't load the the actual boats, as much as they could have. We're not going to discuss that at all today.
Right.
So, again, many people lost their lives. Family members. Jack died, and even an heir to, in Downton Abbey died. But what if this was all an elaborate ploy for an insurance scam? All these people died so someone can collect insurance on a boat.
Who? Why?
So a controversial theory was pushed heavily by author Robin Gardner that it was actually the sister ship of the Titanic, the Olympic, that sank. Who would have disguised the Olympic ship to look like the Titanic? Its owners, the International Mercantile Marine Group, or IMM, controlled by American financier J.P. Morgan, who had acquired the White Star Line, which is what Titanic is, in 1902. Mm-hmm. It's weird to think of J.P. Morgan as the human,
a person,
versus the financial group.
Yeah.
And I had to be like, oh, whoa. I had like that Keanu Reeves moments of, whoa, that's wild. The Olympic was a slightly older sister ship of the Titanic, built alongside the more famous vessel, but launched in October of 1910. Fun fact, there's a third ship, the Britannic, as well. It does play into some conspiracy theories later, but,
And these all sank.
Yep, basically. Okay. Oh, the Olympic technically, I don't think it actually sank.
Assuming that the
Titanic
theory is not actually the Titanic and it's this other one.
Yeah.
Then what happened to the Titanic? If it did just vanish, did it disassemble?
Look. I didn't look up what happened to the Olympic because I'm not talking about the Olympic.
Okay, so not a good track record for these guys.
No. So, the Titanic's exterior profile was nearly identical to the Olympic, save for minor details such as the number of portholes on the forward sea decks of the ship, the spacing of the windows on the B decks, and the forward section of the A deck promenade on Titanic that had been enclosed only a few weeks before she set sail on her ill-fated maiden voyage. Both ships were built with linoleum floors, but shortly before she was due to set sail, the managing director of the White Star Line inexplicably ordered the floors aboard Titanic carpeted over. So instead of having that nice linoleum floors, got some carpet instead, which you can see in the lovely movie. So how would this #ship trap happen? By slowly flooding the Titanic by opening up the sea cocks, which are valves, that would let water in slowly. The hopes of large ships that could easily pick up the passengers meant that there was less of a need for all of those lifeboats. So they didn't need to put them on there, which meant why would you need them if you're going to sink the ship anyways? That's more of a loss. According to Gardner, after the Olympic had a collision and accident of its own in 1911, and the Titanic was so far behind in production and more expensive than thought, the White Star Line decided to patch up the Olympic after the accident, which the insurance company they used did not pay anything out for. And the real Titanic, when complete, would then quietly enter service as the Olympic. Long story short, the Olympic had an accident at sea, right. And the insurance company was like, no, it's your fault. We're not paying anything out for this. You need to it's like when you're in a car accident and it's your fault. And the insurance company is like, no, we're not going to fix this. Like, you have to pay for it out of your own pocket because you haven't hit, whatever. So apparently that's what happened with the Olympic itself.
So they're just butthurt.
And they're already strapped for cash, right? And the Titanic is taking too long to build. It's way over budget. And now they're over here messing with things like putting damn carpet down.
Right.
So maybe they switched them.
Because the Titanic was never actually finished.
That's kind of what it's leaning toward, is that the Titanic wasn't really finished. And so they're like, you know what? Let's just dress the Olympic up to make it the Titanic.
We'll spray paint the lettering over the side.
Well, let's talk about some of the similarities of these two ships. Apparently, the Olympic pre- and post-accident had a list to port, meaning that it tilted a bit to the left, because that's what port is, as I am now dictating to everyone, and hopefully I'm not wrong. The Titanic indeed also had a list to port when leaving Southampton, and this could be due to inadequate trimming of cargo and the bunkers, but it was nothing sinister, honestly. A list to port was noted by several of the Titanic survivors as well. Gardner also states that few parts of either ship bore the name itself, other than the easily removed lifeboats, bell, and compass thing, and the nameplates. So apparently it would have been really easy to switch things over. It's not like, at the Disney cruise ships where you have Mickey Mouse face down on the floor. It's not like you had a big, huge thing that said Titanic on the floor. Mm. Same with the Olympic. I'm buying a little bit into that part because you're like, well, it's easy to change things if they don't have huge names on it.
Right, defining features.
But, I mean, just because you put the name of the Camry on the back of a Toyota Corolla doesn't mean that it's now changed. Like, there's similarities, but it's vastly different.
Right. So they were different ships, and they're not going to be exact. They're not like a commercial ship where there's like multitudes.
Right. They didn't make this. It's not, like the Ford T Model T, where it's built on, an assembly line. They didn't have assembly lines. So everything was going to be different, and they wanted to make the Titanic was bigger.
Right.
So that's why you have like the different number of holes, supposedly, and vice versa. So everything else on both the Titanic as well as the Olympic was standard White Star issue and was interchangeable between the two ships and other vessels in the White Star fleet. While all other White Star Line ships had their name engraved into the hull, the Titanic alone had its name riveted over top. In some of the most recent pictures of the wreck depicting a spot where two riveted plates that had spelled Titanic fell off, the letters MP appear to be stamped into the hull. So that's like the MPs in Olympic. I don't know. It took me a long time to realize what that meant. I was like, what do you mean MP? Like master part, I don't know where I was going. And then I was like, oh, they're trying to think. But I think it's just, the way it might have been photographed. It has nothing really to do, in my opinion. I'm like, I don't think that means anything. Gardner maintains that on the 14th of April, First Officer Murdoch, who was not officially on duty yet, was on the bridge because he was one of the few high-ranking officers, other than Captain Smith, who knew of the plan of the switching ships and sinking it, obviously, and was keeping a watch out for the rescue ships. Because again, they had this whole plan that there would be enough ships nearby when it hit this iceberg that they knew about and had been warned, hey, there's more icebergs than normal because it's cold as hell and, it's April and you're so far north.
This is a terrible plan.
I know. That's why, hold on, this is like a whole stretch.
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, so one of Gardner's most controversial statements is that the Titanic did not actually strike an iceberg, as the story goes, but the ship struck an IMM, the International Mercantile Marine Company rescue ship that was drifting on station with its lights out. Ooh. So one of the ones that was supposed to, rescue the people. Which, again, that makes no sense, and he based this hypothesis on... How big is a ship? It would be smaller. Obviously.
Not enough to sink the damn thing.
Well, apparently in his mind it was big enough to sink it without being noticed as a ship. But, he based this hypothesis on the idea that the supposed iceberg was seen at such a short distance by the lookouts on the Titanic because it was actually a darkened ship. And he also does not believe that an iceberg could inflict such sustained and serious damage to a steel double-hulled vessel such as the Titanic. The ice on the deck of the Titanic is explained by Gardner as ice from the rigging of both the Titanic and the mystery ship she hit. As for the true Titanic, Gardner alleges that she spent 25 years in service as the Olympic and was scrapped in 1935. So, this whole conspiracy is based on his opinion because he can't just believe an iceberg did this to the Titanic.
Right.
His whole theory is based on his opinion of there's no way the iceberg could have tore that ship up and sank it. Everything else is very... maybe not.
Look at, you can cut steel with water, right?
Sure. If it's high powered enough, yeah.
That's what I mean. You can cut steel with water. So is it that outlandish to think that a solid, giant mass of compacted ice couldn't destroy a piece of metal?
I think he's trying to claim that there is no way that if that was out there, that the Titanic would not have been able to avoid it.
Well, from this it says that they're trying to hit it.
Yeah. Well, also that it hit a ship instead.
Yeah.
But, if you thought this theory of hashtag ship trap for insurance money was off or kind of far-fetched, just wait. I got another one for you.
That was it? That was that one?
That was the end of it. It got switched.
It's still crazy.
It is crazy because then you're saying that
that'd have to be a massive cover-up.
It had to be a massive cover-up, and you are sending people out there to die.
Right. Why?
And they knowingly died.
Right.
No one.
Make it less make it less devastating. Well, I guess if
you couldn't make it, but if the whole idea is that there was supposed to be enough rescue ships to save people, including those that were, officers on the ship. Because for the most part, I think, all of them died? And
from what you're saying, half the people on the ship died.
More than half the people died. But I want to say that I don't believe that anyone that actually worked on the ship survived, especially, no one in the boiler rooms. Right. Those were the first ones gone. The captain went down with the ship. I would assume that, the people that were the cooks, the cleaning crew, I don't think that they survived. I mean, I would have to go and look, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't believe anybody in third class survived. And if they did, it was a very small handful. Same with those, in the middle class, second class. I mean, there are people in first class that didn't survive because they were men. Mm. And we're going to go a little bit into this theory about that. So next up, that the Titanic was intentionally sunk to eliminate the opposition to the creation of the Federal Reserve Bank.
Oh, shit.
This is a conspiracy theory I enjoy.
Corporate espionage?
Corporate espionage at its finest. So, we've already talked a little bit about J.P. Morgan, but let's talk a little bit more about him, because Morgan did have a hand in the creation of the Federal Reserve and owned the International Mercantile Marine, which owned the White Star Line and thus the Titanic, as we've already discussed. Some of the wealthiest men in the world were aboard the Titanic for her maiden voyage, several of whom, including John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus, were allegedly opposed to the creation of a U.S. central bank. Allegedly. No evidence of their opposition to Morgan's centralized banking ideas have really been found. Astor and Guggenheim never spoke publicly on the subject, and Strauss spoke in favor of the concept. All three men died during the sinking because of not only the lack of lifeboats, but maritime law at the time. Conspiracy theorists suggest that J.P. Morgan, the 74-year-old financier who set up the investment banking firm that still bears his name, arranged to have the men board the ship and then sink it to eliminate them. Morgan, who was nicknamed the Napoleon of Wall Street, had helped create General Electric, U.S. Steel, and International Harvester, and was credited with almost single-handedly saving the U.S. banking system during the Panic of 1907. So he's not the worst person in the world. He's just,
he's a hero, but probably a kind of a sleazeball.
Yeah.
He's like a guy that had the power and position to make a change for the good, but is still,
Rockefeller. So let's think about the Rockefellers, and when you think of the robber barons of the late 19th century, and how when they actually got rich, they put more money back into their community than what a lot of our self-made million and billionaires do now.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
Because they kind of believe more in the community aspect, community not me type situation. Morgan, who had attended the Titanic's launching in 1911, had booked a personal suite aboard the ship with his own private promenade deck and a bath equipped with specially designed cigar holders. He was reportedly booked on the ship's maiden voyage, but instead canceled the trip and remained at the French resort that he had been staying at to enjoy his morning massages and sulfur baths. His allegedly last-minute cancellation has fueled speculation among conspiracy theorists, but not me, that he knew of the ship's fate. If we think about fate, we can relate this to a more recent disaster, like we've already brought up, 9/11.
Right.
Many people didn't get on the planes. Seth MacFarlane from Family Guy fame didn't get on a plane that he was supposed to that morning that wound up hitting one of the towers. Many people didn't go to work, or they were late and, missed the train, missed getting to the World Trade Center where they were working on time. So the Titanic was actually not full on its first voyage. It wasn't full up at all. There were sold rooms and even suites that went unfilled. This disaster could have been much worse, but I don't believe J.P. Morgan knew the ship was going to sink intentionally and didn't get on board. So why didn't Morgan get on the ship? There are two good suggestions from historians that have studied this man. France was changing its laws to prevent Americans from exporting art treasures from that country, so Morgan went to Paris to oversee getting his purchases out of the country before the new laws went into effect, which... LOL the Louvre, but whatever. And that the official explanation was that Morgan fell ill and wanted to take the quote-unquote cure at a spa in France with his mistress. And it probably could have been both reasons, honestly. That's basically all there is to that theory, is that he didn't get on. The Hershey guy didn't get on either.
Hershey?
Yeah, the guy who created Hershey's. He was a rich man. A lot of people like chocolate.
Yeah, people still like chocolate.
People love chocolate. So, in my opinion, I don't think this is a conspiracy theory that he didn't get on knowingly that it was going to sink. So, whether he knew it was going to sink for the insurance purposes or he knew it was going to sink for whatever reason, he didn't get on. I honestly believe the trying to get his artifacts out of the country, because that's what rich people do.
Right.
And they want to...
It's going to cost me money? Yeah, no.
Or the inability to take it out of the country.
Right.
Which, again, if you've been to the Louvre, that has artifacts from all around the world that France had been a colonizer of or had purchased. So it's funny that they're the ones saying you can't take these artifacts out of here.
Hypocrisy is finest.
Yeah. And I'm like, so what do they do themselves? So, whatever. Okay, so I'm going to be honest. For our next two theories, we're going to get into some mechanical things. I ain't about that science life, as anyone who knows me knows. But we gonna try today to talk a little about science.
Okay.
So, this next theory involves Titanic's watertight doors. That was kind of like a new thing, was that in case something happened, there were watertight doors that could close off so the rest of the ship would not get flooded.
Right, an area that had been compromised, they could seal it off.
Yep. So this theory suggests that if these doors had been opened, the Titanic would have settled on an even keel and perhaps remained afloat long enough for rescue ships to arrive. So people think that, even though they did hit the iceberg, that these doors were not open. And, if they had taken care of things, if they had used the watertight doors appropriately, because again, I think this was like the first ship that actually had them in use or trying to use. But they had actually not been used.
Right. It's like they made this idea, but didn't test it, so they had no idea how it actually worked.
Yeah. So this theory has been rebutted multiple times, but there are two main reasons that, would not. So first, the first four compartments were naturally watertight. Thus, it was impossible to lower the concentration of water in a bow significantly. So basically, once the water is there, like it's watertight, they're not supposed to get in there. And... even if, I don't know, science. Second, mechanical things. Second, Titanic researchers / historians have shown by calculations that any significant amount of water after boiler room number 4 would have resulted in capsizing of the Titanic, which would have occurred about 30 minutes earlier than the actual time of sinking. So, with the water getting in, using the watertight doors, if they had been used, appropriately, to the way people think that it should have been used, the boat itself would have capsized versus breaking and then sinking down to the bottom. I don't know what would have been worse. Because capsizing...
At least it'd still be afloat.
But then all the people would have been on the decks.
True. And there'd probably be no way of getting to...
out.
Any type of safe position.
You would have had to have been on... Yeah, there would have been no one that could have survived, I think, if it capsized. Because of how large it was, too. So additionally, the lighting would have been lost about 70 minutes after the collision due to the flooding of the boiler rooms. It has also been analyzed in the hypothetical case that there were no bulkheads at all. Then the vessel would have capsized about 70 minutes before the actual time of sinking, and lighting would have been lost about 40 minutes after the collision. So to suggest that these watertight doors, if they had been opened and they had been used the way that theorized, it actually would have been worse. Right. And it would have sunk a lot quicker, which means that you would not have been rescued. Like, those people would have been on the water for a lot fucking longer time, which would, I think, would have been a lot worse. So our second mechanical theory involves how the ship actually broke, or didn't, before plunging into the bottom of the ocean. So, it's been a hot minute since I've seen Titanic. How about you?
Yeah.
Do you remember how the ship sank?
They hit an iceberg.
Do you remember the daring scene of them going to, like, the bow of the ship, like the top of the ship, as it floated up?
Yes.
And it was perpendicular into little bob, doop, 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 and then fell down? Yeah, that didn't fucking happen. Movie magic. However, Titanic researchers have continued to debate the causes and the mechanics of the ship's actual breakup. One, in the first theory many think of, describes the Titanic as assuming an absolutely perpendicular position shortly before its final plunge.
Like a cartoon.
Yes, this view remained largely unchanged even after the wreck was discovered in 1985. Upon discovery, the ship was in two pieces, which confirmed that the Titanic had broken in two at or near the surface because of how it landed as well as how it was broken. Like how the ship itself was broken there. Yet, Paintings by some noted marine artists named Ken Marshall, as well as James Cameron's film Titanic, both depicted the ship attaining a steep angle prior to going down. So prior to the ship actually breaking. And I mean, I already talked about, I was like, I'm just visualizing Jack and Rose at the top. And even though they show the two pieces in the movie, it absolutely, in my mind, bobs before it sank. Most researchers acknowledge that Titanic's aft expansion joint, designed to allow for the flexion of the hull in a seaway, played little to no role in the ship's breakup, though debate continued as to whether the ship had broken from the top downwards or from the bottom upwards.
Right.
So is it that I mean, in my opinion, I think that the bottom is now fully encased of water and the bottom is the one that's pulling away. And then the top just kind of like goes glue, glue, glue. It's like when you have like a cup, right?
Right.
I'm trying to think, like, I don't know what they're called, but like something that looks like these like larger like pill things that has like that break in the middle that you can like pop and think something comes out. Like a case. You're just thinking of like a case, cylindrical case that has a thing in the middle. Obviously it's circle 3D. If you put that in water and you popped it open, and let's say that the part that had, I don't know, there was like a crack in it or something. It was like floating and there's a crack in one part and it started already going like this, and you break it apart to like see if you can preserve the top piece that's not necessarily flooded all the way. That bottom piece, I think, would be the one that goes and falls because it's already waterlogged with the water that had gotten in.
Right.
Like, there's a theory that
ship definitely hit that iceberg, didn't even break. It just tipped up vertically and just sank like this, straight down.
Just
like a cartoon ship sinking. Exactly. That's totally what happened. Fact.
That's how I want to picture it in my head. It blows my mind that we had people literally sitting in the water watching it, and yet there is debate if the ship broke.
Right.
I mean, maybe it did a break, and then that top part was like the bottom of the ship was still kind of like intact, so like it did the like a tearaway. Right. It's like when you're tearing like a piece of duct tape in it, like it's not all at once, it's a slow rip across.
Right.
So like if you're thinking that that's in the water and there's like a zipper type of situation, and so you have that top part is there and you're like, okay, so it's going. But I feel like that the part that was not sinking would have I don't think it ever would have gone perpendicular.
It's all about the weight of the boat versus the buoyancy of the boat. If there's that much water compromised, or that much airspace in the ship that's compromised with water, then all of that weight is being forced down with gravity. There's no buoyancy anymore because it's all, now you have all this real weight pulling down that's filled with water. So if you had something that was floating that all of a sudden gained like 50 pounds on one side of it, that shit snapped in half. So the fact that it snapped in half because one half of the boat, and this is a large ship, and by large I mean incredibly small.
So there's I wouldn't call it necessarily conspiracy theory, but it's a discourse about, did the ship break before it got under the water? Because we know it's in two pieces underneath on the floor.
Right.
And they're far enough apart, but the water is so damn deep, right? That did it break on its descent into the water, or did it break before it sank? Right. That's basically the question. And if the joints themselves had, these expansion joints had anything to do with it. And honestly, the expansion joints had no meaning for the support of the hull, and they played no role in the breaking of the hull of the ship. They simply opened up and parted as the hull flexed or broke beneath them. Because nobody knows.
Right.
And it's just, I think it's a interesting discourse, and people want to talk about like, well, they weren't installed correctly because of how the rivets were done. They were done by hand versus a machine, and they may not have been as tight because they were on that tight timeline and they're going quickly. Mm. If it had been done by a machine, there's the possibility that it would have been tightened better and it might have floated longer. I feel like I have no horse in the matter. Like, I have no horse in this race when it comes to the joints and how the ship did, went underneath. But
I think that's a silly thing to obsess about, where it's like, oh, something horrible happened. Well, how did it happen?
Well, I think the reason it got obsessed over is, how did this happen? And how did this boat that had all of these safe measures in place, not happen, not work?
Right.
I think that there's a lot of discourse on how can you make something better. And with the Titanic, the goal by many people that had survived the Titanic, especially those affluent women that were in first class, was to bring about how can we make this not happen again? Because there are so many people that are, on boats in peacetime or in wartime having to deal with is what happens if my boat gets, hit by a missile, by a U-boat, by some sort of mine or whatever in the water, or if it collides with another ship, how do we survive?
Right.
And the Titanic was supposed to have those safety measures in place.
That every other ship should have had, yeah. And
right.
Somehow this event was more catastrophic than what every other ship has ever... Every other ship incident or accident or attack that has ever happened was somehow more productive in life-saving than this thing as a passenger ship.
Yeah.
It makes no sense that was that devastating. Like you said, the hubris was the biggest thing, where it's like, oh, we don't need to worry about this shit. We're unsinkable. We don't give a crap. And or money or time thing. So they're less conspiracies and more like...
But then they are conspiracies to a point, right? Because we know what happened. We know it's in two pieces. But then there's people who are like, nah, man, it went perpendicular and then all the way down. And then it must have broke when it hit the bottom of the floor. But I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense for how far apart the two pieces were found. The thing is, there's also documentaries that go over the wreckage itself, what it looks like, and finding the stuff that's in there.
There's also, just to play devil's advocate on the breaking on the surface of the seabed, let's say the ship was maintained structurally and it did sink like a cartoon ship. And once it hit the bottom, because of the massive weight that was pulling down, it did snap in half at the bottom. But the second half of the boat had a lot of air left in it still. Yes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it decided,
that's how I think about it.
And it decided, you know what, I want to go back to the surface now that I'm separated from the anchor of the other better half of the ship. I want to float away. And then it was compromised after it lost all of its air because there's a giant hole in it now.
Yeah.
And then it sank further away.
Yep.
So that is probable, assuming that it did sink that way. Because I could see that being a probable cause for them being separated apart. But the fact that of it sinking like a cartoon ship just seems ridiculous.
Yeah.
It seems more likely that it would have snapped in half because of the length of the ship. Because a lot of these large ships are incredibly long.
Yes.
And less wide than they are long. We're talking 20 to 1 in width to length.
I know. And then you look at what we have now. If you put the Titanic, or I think the Olympic, even though it was scrapped or whatever, next to what we have now for cruise ships,
right.
It's laughable at how much bigger our ships are now, but they're only able to survive the way they do because we had disasters like the Titanic and Lusitania to make it safer and better for people, now to go out and go on a cruise with Mickey and Minnie. Mm. All right, we got 2 more theories left.
Oh my god, I need more drink. I'm already gone, honestly, at this point. But let's keep going.
All right, so our next theory involves how burning coals weaken the ship's integrity.
Coal.
Big
coal.
It's not big coal. Stop it. It was documented that a fire began in one of Titanic's coal bunkers approximately 10 days prior to the ship's departure and continued to burn for several days into the voyage. This is nothing out of the ordinary.
So they let the water in intentionally to light the fire?
No, but because you had this fire that was continuing to burn, that it weakened the hull of the ship, and then when the iceberg hit it, it wasn't as strong as it needs to be.
So you had a compromised hull, and that's why...
That's why I said the word integrity, the compromised integrity of the hull of the ship. Okay. The ship's integrity.
So you had this Play-Doh wall.
Oh my
gosh. The ship was like, fuck you, and just smashed into it.
Basically, yeah. The iceberg was coming up. It was like 2 days from melting into the sea, and it just somehow whipped that shit into shape and killed the Titanic. That is kind of how this goes. So the fires occurred frequently on board steamships due to spontaneous combustion of the coal in furnaces. Science! These fires had to be extinguished with fire hoses. This was done by moving the coal on top to another bunker and by removing the burning coal and feeding it into the furnace. So there was a whole bunch of furnaces in there because it's a huge ship. It's a steamship. It's still using coal and shenanigans. This event has led some to theorize that the fire exacerbated the effects of the iceberg collision by reducing the structural integrity of the hull and a critical bulkhead. One theory states that the bunker fire was at the heart of the eventual disaster, claiming that decisions made because of the blaze led it to a collision course with the iceberg. Because they want to go faster, they have, trying to get out of the water. This theory also looks at the fire's physical effect on the ship, which claims it weakened the area of impact, as we already talked about. It is also suggested that the attempts to extinguish the fire by shoveling burning coals into the engine furnaces may have been the primary reason for the Titanic steaming at full speed prior to the collision, despite the ice warnings that it received.
So this is just a domino effect of bullshit, basically.
Yes, and it's not... So I wouldn't necessarily say this is a conspiracy theory, but it could have contributed, right? This is one where I'm like, maybe. However, most experts disagree with this theory. An expert on the Titanic and its sinking concluded that, quote, the bunker fire would not have weakened the watertight bulkhead sufficiently to cause it to collapse, end quote. Also, it has been alternatively suggested that the coal bunker fire actually helped Titanic to last longer during the sinking and prevented the ship from rolling over to starboard after the impact due to the subtle port list created by the moving of coal inside the ship prior to the encounter with the iceberg. So remember how there was the leaning of the ship? Mm-hmm. So we had the list. List just means leaning to one side of a ship. So you have this ship leaning, and instead of it rolling over because of the collision and capsizing, which is also something that we've kind of already talked about, with the capsizing and how it could have been faster, due to other mechanical issues with the ship, that possibly the coal fire that some people think, exacerbated and created this actually helped people not die, not as many people die. It made it less than. I don't understand science. And the thing is that you don't want to actually test this theory out either way. To know, right? Because you're losing a lot of people's lives. You're also going to lose a ship because you can't put this into a sink or a bathtub to try. You actually have to put it out in the damn water, which is another thing that, people talk about the Titanic is that it didn't really actually have that test run before the maiden voyage. And if there was a quote unquote test run, it would have been fine. I mean, even the morning, so that Sunday morning before it hit, there was supposed to be a drill in case you had to find your lifeboat and stuff, but it was called off by the people in first class wanting to, I think, attend church. All right. Are you ready for the last one?
Yes.
It's the best one. I have the best for last.
Aliens.
You're so close. You are so
mole
close.
People. Wait, Atlantis.
Nope.
Dang it.
Okay. My favorite conspiracy theory that can be tied to the Titanic, and I would say tied as in loosely tied, is the theory that a mummy was on board and is the reason for the sinking, like a cursed mummy.
Like Brendan Fraser's The Mummy?
Let's back up. I want to tie this into J.P. Morgan. We knew J.P. Morgan was taking artifacts out of France.
Oh, shit. He put a cursed mummy on the ship.
What if he did that because he didn't want to sail with it? And he was like, you know what? You go ahead. Go ahead,
Cursed. That guy willingly put a cursed mummy on a ship and then was like, you know what? I'm good. But
also, I've never understood why people didn't try to tie those two together. If you're going to it's an urban legend. The mummy on the ship is an urban legend. It's not on any of the manifests on being brought on. But also, if you are trying to quote unquote smuggle your artifacts out of the country of France before, it's not, you're going to say it's something else. But I don't think anybody had tied it to JP Morgan.
It's my toilet paper collection.
Your toilet paper. I mean, you could have said it was your wine collection from France if he was, bringing from France and whatnot. But there is no evidence that any Egyptian artifacts, such as a mummy, were on board. And it's just rolled as that urban legend. But I like it. Like, out of all of them, that's the one I like.
That's the funniest one for sure. All the
It's-
other ones are at least like
Uh,
in the realm of possibility, due to the fact that so many people were lost. Anybody that would have had any idea of what was going on probably died. You know, if they were involved in the boiler fire or the steering of the ship or any type of control of the ship, it seems like those people probably didn't make it. So there's no information from that person's or those people's perspectives. But the people that did survive either A, are traumatized by the experience and are unable to recollect things that happened because they're so adrenally induced, fear, all this shit. All right, so they probably don't have a great recollection of what was happening right in front of them because they just couldn't believe what was happening.
Yeah.
And then you're fighting for your life
Well,
at that point too. So.
and even the people that were in first class that were in some of the first boats down, they were instructed. You know what? No, there were people that worked on the ship that did get off because they had to row the boats. Those people were instructed to get the F away from the boat. So when it plunged down or capsized, however it was going to go, you didn't want to be swallowed with it.
Right. Because that's a huge ship.
And they did
pulling
not go
under.
back to get people that were frantically screaming and crying in the water.
Right.
I mean, eventually you do have some people that were rescued from the water. Very few of them. But it's, I mean, that water was frozen. I can't imagine. Like, I feel like drowning to me is possibly the worst way to go.
It's horrible.
Fire, at least your body goes into shock. Like, out of all the horrible ways to die,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's drowning and then fire, followed by probably dementia.
No way. Suffocation's the worst.
Well, 'cause
Buried
that's-
alive.
But that's also how, like, the drowning goes.
Yeah,
You're being
that's true.
suffocated.
Yeah.
But you're in water and you can't breathe at all. And even when you get the water in your lungs, you start, and it's just a grasping situation. So, out of all of these theories of fun, which mummy,
Cursed mummy for sure is the...
but here's the thing. I feel like you have to tie the cursed mummy with JP Morgan.
Yeah.
That's obviously what happened.
Mummy caused everything. He caused the fire. He caused the iceberg to appear out of nowhere. He caused JP Morgan to
not get on the
sick.
ship.
Yeah, he got sick and didn't get on the ship.
But because of maybe how much the mummy cost, they needed the insurance money. So then they did switch the ship. So those was actually the Olympic that, fell.
Right. So
I feel like it's the mummies.
It's the mummy caused everything.
The mummy was the domino effect.
Yep. It is
Not the fire.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is the end of this one. So thanks again for joining us on another fun, riddled conspiracy theory fun times on But Have You Heard About Conspiracy Theory Edition. As always, I'm your host, Courtney, and I'm joined by Matt.
Hello.
This is a bye.
Goodbye.
And thank you again so much for spending some time with us today, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.